introduction, Miriam has introduced herself already during her talk. Cecilia, thank you very well for coming over from Denmark. Cecilia is working as the Chief of Staff to CIO at Novo Nordisk, so one of the biggest European companies. She has a management consulting background, worked for several startups, helped the Denmark ecosystem a lot, and I think it's very good to have you on board here for that discussion, bringing also an international perspective into that whole discussion, so thank you for coming. And then we have Mark Schiekofer with us. He has extensive knowledge when it comes to digital transformation topics. He has worked as a management consultant at BCG. He has been the director of growth at Planetly, a company which has been successfully sold, and now he's operating partner at Triton, which is a private equity firm. So I guess there's a lot we can learn from this panel participants. So let's get started maybe directly with the first question to you, Mark. I mean, like, you have listened to Miriam's talk. How do you look like on the German state when it comes to digital transformation? You have a lot of companies in your portfolio at Triton. What is your view on digital transformation in Germany?
First of all, I think it's very, very important to dissect the word digital transformation. What is that actually? So I would want to start out just by maybe spending a couple of thoughts on what actually digital transformation is, because I believe it's not easy to properly define digital transformation. And I believe I've spent a fair amount of my career probably doing bits and pieces of it, but probably also doing a couple of things that are not necessarily digital transformation. So I worked as a corporate venture builder, so we were doing startup incubations, if you like, for large BCG clients when I was working at BCG still. And is that truly digital transformation? I doubt it. It's not like we were changing the fundamental core business of any corporate. We are maybe showing the art of the possible by launching ventures to very, very inagile companies. But I think that's not by definition digital transformation. Or when I speak to portfolio companies these days, when I look at our portfolio of 50 companies across Europe, and ask them, what's your digital transformation roadmap? What is that looking like? And you get all bits and pieces again, right? We're doing NIS2 compliance. We're doing a cybersecurity audit. We're doing, we're playing a bit around with Gen AI, and we've introduced a chatbot on our website, and we're now launching ChatGPT for each and every employee. I think that all is not what digital transformation is about, and I think that's very, very important. For me, digital transformation is really changing the fundamental core operating model of a business, and we're later going to talk about who's driving that, and it always, in my book, has to be driven by board and C-level executives, so CEO, CFO, and it cannot be just a tiny bit, and it cannot be delegated away or anything. It needs to really fundamentally leverage technology, of course, but really, really change the entire operating model of a company and be measurable in true business KPIs every investor would care about. So that's top line, that's bottom line. And I think if your digital transformation program doesn't touch upon these and is not really driven by CEO, is not a digital transformation. So I think that was just something I wanted to start off with. I'm not sure what other perspectives are, and I think then we can talk a bit more clear of what we see going on and whatnot. So sorry, not precisely answering your question, but I think important to set the ground a bit.
Definitely, definitely. Thanks for that. Then maybe we can just continue with you, Cecilia, because we talked a lot about ingredients, and Miriam talked about ingredients for successful transformation, and Germany might be an example where we are missing some of those ingredients. We talked a lot about change management, people. So what, from your perspective, also seeing Denmark in the top over there, when we looked at the chart Miriam just showed, what are ingredients from your perspective that make digital transformation successful?
Does this one work? Yeah, it does. Perfect. Nice to see you all. I think there are a couple of things that I at least like to consider in this regard. I think going back to the business value, for me, is actually always what I go for, the value creation. What is it really we are optimizing for? What is it we're solving for? So that needs to be very, very clear. That should be your guiding star. So if you're in pharma, you don't consider ChatGPT your digital transformation. No, it's how do we develop proteins, how do we develop molecules, how do we change the way we go. I think secondary to that is the whole foundation. There's the people, there's the culture. Without those, you're going to get nowhere. Then you also have a whole infrastructure, and you have security and everything, technology laying below that. You need to have the right problem, and then you need to find the right team. They need to find the right technology to solve that problem. You should not go the other way and find a technology and fall in love with that, trying to solve a problem. That, for me, is not how you drive it, because that in turn will give you the demand in the business you want. Because you need demand, you need to have your stakeholders to buy into this. And if they're not buying into it, you don't have the right culture. So you can actively yourself change the culture by asking the right problem and seeing what actually incentivizes those around you to take the right actions. On top of this, when you talk about what are we solving for me, data, KPIs are super critical. You know, you need to understand, what does success look like? This may change over time, but you need to have an vision for what is it actually that's going to take me to the next level. And that is, can be many different things, but I think this is for me where I will always start, and then I will try to tackle the problem and attach those elements to it as well.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the most important ingredients, at least from my perspective, and I think that was also mentioned when you, Miriam, asked into that room, is the question of accountability and ownership of digital transformation. And Mark just spoiled his opinion. What is your opinion? Who should really be in the driver's seat for digital transformation in a company?
So everybody is the answer, but the employees will not do it if their CEO doesn't, right? So I loved also what Moritz was talking about, Alex, what Alex from Oetker Digital was talking about. You know, every CEO should start playing around with these types of tools. And then creativity will bloom from that. So it's for sure everybody, it needs to trickle down, but it needs to, like always, it needs to start from the top at least, right? I mean, it's very difficult to get whole companies or thousands of employees to be excited about something, especially if they might be afraid of their job security. But if it's not the CEO being excited and standing up in front and advocating for this, then why should anybody else?
Definitely, definitely. Maybe touching then upon what you just said, Cecilia, regarding data and the role of data in that whole digital transformation process, and also touching upon what Miriam, you just said regarding ownership. As a management, when we look at digital transformation, how are we sure, or how can we be sure, looking at data, we are on the right track? Because I think that's quite difficult. Looking at our portfolio, a lot of companies we invest in, especially in the private equity area, they have a lot of digital transformation ahead, but it's always quite difficult to get the right data in place to really monitor if you're going into the right direction. So what would be your view on data when it comes to digital transformation?
Before I go there, can I disagree a little?
Yes, definitely.
I think the CEO doesn't need to be excited. It's our job to make him excited. If there's a business case, he'll be excited. If there's a technology, I wouldn't be excited. You can solve my neighbor's problems, but not mine. Then let him buy it. It's our job to make them excited. And if we don't succeed, then it's our fault. I see it as a go-to-market problem when you're internally in an organization. If you have a problem large enough and painful enough, it will be addressed. And if you have the best solution, I believe that it's our job to present that. So if we jump to the data side, on the data side, for me, there are two ways to approach it that I like to think about. There's the whole foundation of data. You need to figure out the data that you want to measure. What is it good looks like? You will have leading indicators and lagging indicators. So those indicators will take you to the end results. The lagging indicators will be the top line or the bottom line. But before that, if you look at a go-to-market problem, you will have KPIs that are going to look at, what are the sign-ups? What are the indications that you actually start to see that give you an indication of how well adopted your product is? Then on top of this, you can start looking at, in Novo, I wouldn't look at sign-ups, but I would look at rollouts. We have architecture maps, for instance, for factories. It sounds pretty boring, but when you start thinking about it, if we have 500 different digital applications over 5,000 different factories, we will start to be able to map out what is the impact of these different digital initiatives. That way we can then accelerate those where we see the biggest impact and how they are related to each other once we see them in clusters. That is where you make a problem reliable and interesting for the top level, because you start accelerating the go-to-market, or the, you can say, reduce the time spent on actually producing a product, or reduce the cost of doing so. Secondary, you need to actually think of data in several dimensions as a path. Data for me is, you have core data, and then you have data that are adjacent to this, and then you move from the core and out. You need to make sure you have the core level secured first. That means you can have a handful maximum of data points you want to go for. And over time, you might get into hundreds, but keep it simple and try to optimize for those and build your roadmap based on those, would be my suggestion. So you always keep your North Star very, very clear. Does that answer it for you?
That answers the question, and I think
Can I?
Miriam wants
Yes,
to disagree.
just very briefly. No, I don't want to disagree on that, but I want to. But you said earlier, if the problem becomes big enough, then they will act, or we will act. Yeah, but then it might be too late, right? The thing is, I think a lot of people are too complacent, too saturated, we're too comfortable, and it's way too uncomfortable to start acting than to just wait a little bit longer. And then once the problem is then super in your face, then it might be too late. And to your question earlier about who else might be responsible, we do need to take a step forward in regards to educating our children, right? So that they have a different mindset going forward, because I think a lot of the decision makers today are at an age or at a point in their time of their career where they might not want to rock the boat and just, steer towards their retirement. Thank you. So they might, I think they might actually miss the actual problem, or it might then be too late. So sorry, that's what I wanted to add.
That's completely fine. I think, Mark, maybe you can, because I think that's a very interesting point about accountability, who's owning it. And you just mentioned your point of view in one sentence. Maybe you can elaborate, observing different companies. You said board, C-level should definitely drive that. Maybe you can elaborate why you think that is.
Yeah, so I think overall, it always depends a bit on the setting, right? But I wouldn't disagree with what was said before, that each and everybody should have the responsibility to drive forward, playing around with technology, finding innovative solutions to problems at hand. I do, however, believe if the C-level delegates this away, or if you have a CDO, like a Chief Digital Officer, and you say, okay, this is my guy to drive it, I'm having a hard time believing that this is the right mindset at a company. And we do have a lot of portcos, don't get me wrong, that have a Chief Digital Officer, and there's nothing really wrong. But if you really see the CEO delegating this away, I think then we're not being serious enough about digital transformation here. And then we're probably looking at initiatives that are not in direct correlation to top line and bottom line, because if we were, then obviously a CFO and a CEO would care. So that would be, that is why I earlier said I believe they need to be involved, they need to drive, because otherwise we're just probably not thinking big enough, not being bold enough, and maybe doing a bit of playing around with technology, but we're not fundamentally changing operating logic of a business.
And that's what digital transformation is about, right?
That to me is what it is about, what it should be about,
that.
because otherwise we're thinking too small and it's just too tiny bits and pieces.
Yeah. So maybe coming back to what Cecilia just said about data, Mark, I was wondering, when you are looking at your portfolio company, maybe before you're even investing, I guess you kind of evaluate the digital scoring of those companies, how much value add you can generate, because that's basically your business. Is there any framework, any data you're using to assess companies, especially also in Germany when it comes to digital scoring?
So as you'd expect from a consultant, of course, we have a framework. We call it the Triton Digital House. You've got the strategy sitting on top of it. And then we're thinking in systems and solutions, and we're thinking in front end and back end. And what that means is we're really looking at the digital solutions that are being used by a company that is front end customer facing. Could be software products, could be IoT products, could be what have you. But we're also looking at solutions put out to the workforce. So that's productivity apps, for example. And then we're looking at the systems in place. So that is customer facing, go to market, like how do we bring a product to market, where we're selling through. And of course, inward facing, this is a bit more the IT infrastructure, so the IT architecture, the solutions in place, and etc. And that house sits on a foundation, and the foundation is pretty much the skills and capabilities, the team. And we do assess all of these dimensions in DD settings, but more importantly also post-acquisition, when we go into a short sprint with each and every portfolio company to go through the digital house and get a maturity score. But more importantly, actually ideate on what a digital transformation program could look like, put it into writing, and then get going.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing. I would have one last question, and then as we had an engaging round here, I would also hand over the mic for one last question after that to somebody from the audience. But Cecilia, last question in your direction. We have been talking a lot about Germany. Your company is located in Denmark, and when we look again at that slide, Denmark is ranking quite high when it comes to the digital score. Is there any specific, and it's a very broad question, I know, but is there any specific secret what Denmark is doing differently than Germany?
There's no silver bullet, I'm sorry. But I think if we look at Denmark generally ranking quite high, digitalization go quite far back, and data does as well. So I actually reflected a little bit on some of the core data elements, and I think the CPR, social security numbers, were invented in 1960s, right? Like as the core identification of a person that goes across all systems you log into today. This is your number that you cannot get rid of even if you try. And I think this is one thing that was digitalized in early 90s. So that just shows how early they actually were. The computer was just out. They started doing the data classification and actually taking a selective few data points where they say, this is our guiding star. This is the core true data point that we're going to adhere to. So we can't rely on addresses, we can't rely on all this, but this one we will always know. So I think that's one part. Then it moved from there saying, okay, with this one, if we use this data point, we can unlock the next level. We can unlock digital signatures, we can unlock digital emails through everyone that's secured by the government, because then you have a core data number per individual in Denmark, but you also have it per company. So they digitally sign everything. We sign it. That means you can connect those two throughout time. And then you keep building on those things, right? So it's about figuring out what core points do you have that you can build on and connect over time with others. And then you start having not just one product, but connected products and ecosystems that actually feed together. And I think this is part of what companies then also apply, because we see it in the companies. They are forced to it by the government. You know, they start soft and introduce it, but they do it in, and I alluded to this earlier, the demand. They create a demand for it. For me, this is very important. I don't say that the CEO should not take accountability, but if they don't see it, it's our job to make sure that they see it's a problem or that we raise it. Then they can choose to act on it or not. But if we connect it to the core problem statement of a company, I bet you they will see it. Or if it's going to generate a lot of revenue, they usually will take that bet. And that's the same with governments. You see the same all over. So keep bringing it back, connecting the data points and building out the ecosystem one by one. So it's not an overnight thing. It's a journey. I mean, Denmark started then in 1960s, right? And we're 2024 today. It takes time. And then I think once you have those, you can start making it mandatory. Then you flip it, right? You go from creating demand to saying, okay, we got the demand, we flip it. Now it's mandatory. And you need an exception to get out of it. And you make it difficult or annoying to get out of. And then people transition those that weren't necessarily on the front row for transitioning.
All right, thanks a lot for sharing that perspective. And I was provoking the silver bullet question, so thanks for answering that. We now have time, I think, for one, unfortunately only one question. So I think you've been first here, so.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So we were talking about innovation initially, then we were talking about problem solving. So my question is like for all of you. There is problem solving and then there is innovation. So do you think that Germany is still stuck in problem solving, like don't fix if it isn't broken, and that is why it's restricting itself from innovation? How do you find, like, where to find the balance and promote the innovation to grow faster?
Is that for me or? Do you want to go first?
I don't think we have an innovation problem. I think it's about scaling it and finding the right use cases. But to answer, maybe as an attempt to answer your question, but maybe you have better answers. We're still a little bit maybe stuck in trying to find the perfect solution, which might keep us too focused on one particular thing and miss opportunities right and left.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, is it that we are allocating too much on problem solving rather than finding new stuff?
It could be the lack thereof, right? It could be that you need to look at the product market fit. What is it actually you're trying to solve? You can innovate, but are you innovating a thing that's actually needed? And that's what I mean with demand. What you innovate need to be attractive, so you have less convincing to do. Otherwise, you need a man that can sell sand in Sahara for everything they do. And that's not gonna build a very scalable business.
I think you always need to, it's always good to solve a problem because then you'll have higher adoption quicker. But of course, Steve Jobs didn't solve the problem of the iPhone being the solution. So sometimes you do have to think outside the box and identify problems that your users might not yet know about. And then that's true innovation, right?
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. I think we need, unfortunately, to end the panel. So maybe we can just take that question outside, because there's a lot of networking space over there. So thanks a lot to all the panelists. Thank you, Miriam, again for that great presentation. It was very inspiring, and I think there are a lot of open questions when I saw the hands that were raised when I asked if there are some questions. So let's discuss afterwards. Thanks a lot for all and the audience. And then the next talk is going to happen, I think, in 5 minutes already. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.